Hi guys, I am going to tackle the Guardian article about video games and fueling the rise of the alt-right. But first, I forgot to do this yesterday and I kicked myself after the fact. So forgive me while I do it right off the bat here. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com, Leanna K. The link is in the description box below this video. All my stuff about video games and gun violence got demonetized by YouTube. I requested a review. I still haven't heard anything because YouTube doesn't send you an email notification when your videos get flagged. You have to look for yourself. And so I lost quite a few views on each of those videos owing to the fact that YouTube just goes, nope. But I want to keep talking about this stuff. I think it's important, and I know it helps you guys to have information, because that's what I try to be more than anything, an information portal as well as opinion. But I think you guys deserve the information. You deserve nutritious brain food. And so any help you can provide to financially helps me be able to continue to do this. But you do get perks. You do get, weekly Thursday videos, usually just goofiness. But they're fun. But you also get access to surveys about upcoming content, and we are coming up to discussing what's next after season 1 of Lady Bits. We are approaching the halfway mark, which means it's time to start talking about what's next, because that kind of stuff needs to be pre-planned. I don't want there to be the huge lead up that there was to Lady Bits. It really ate into the revenue model, so I want to correct that mistake next time. So if you want to be a part of that, get in now. Only $1 a month, although I think that tier might be a little higher. I'm not sure. I'm still mulling that over. It's against my instincts to put, well, if you pay a certain amount of money, you get more of this, but unfortunately that is the way the world works. It's a part I really don't like. How right-wing of me, isn't it? Isn't it? Accepting capitalist realities is now evil and big bad. That was a joke, by the way. So let's look at this Guardian article. People on Twitter brought this to my attention. They said they were getting stuck in Sarlacc pit style conversations on this, where they were just being dismissed out of hand for not using all the good words. So I want to just basically give you the tools to combat this Freudian phallocentric psychobabble. If you've seen Lady Bits episode 5, I go in at length on natural law theory, and I actually mentioned Jacques Lacan, who's referenced in this article, and traced back the fundamental flaws of a lot of that thinking. We're not going to get into that detail today because you can watch the other show. I'm going to take a different take, a little different. Well, not quite. We'll see how much time I have when I get there. But yeah, please go back if you are interested in that particular part. I wouldn't recommend reading Lacan. There are way more accessible, much more coherent, more useful philosophers and psychological thinkers out there. I know Lacan was a psychologist, but there's huge amounts of philosophy in what he talks about. But there are much better references on drives and drivers and motivations and instincts, and I would recommend Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind as a starter. It's a really good primer, and it's really easy to understand, unlike Lacan, that I find one of these great minds that people think is great because he's blinding people with bullshit, and it's difficult to understand, therefore it must be brilliant. No, concepts that stand the test of time tend to be simple and elegant, and Lacan is the the psychological equivalent of string theory. So let's dive in, because there's serious problems with this article. Before we even get to that, go away, Kaspersky. All right. But the first problem with this article, yes, I know you failed to install Chrome because I'm using it. The first problem with this article is that it makes a big intellectual mistake. It equates three things that are not equal. They are not the same. I wouldn't even claim they are similar in a lot of ways. You'll notice this article uses far right in the title and right libertarian in the photo caption. And then it uses alt-right down in the body of the text. And then it just uses political right, the right as a whole. So it's equating four things that are not the same. The far right, which most people believe to be the culturally conservative right wing, the family values, we love God and country, that is not necessarily defined by the same nationalistic white supremacist bent that the alt-right is. I mean, the alt-right has a huge element of counterculture and just burn it all down and thumbing their nose at society. It doesn't approach traditionalism in the same way at all. The alt-right is just the new old hotness. We're going to do nationalism our way. Whereas the far right thinks the Bible, you need to read one book your entire life. This is it. You need to know nothing else. Then there is the right libertarian, which is not the same thing at all. Biblical rules? What? Libertarians want pot and prostitution to be legal. Like, I have libertarian leanings myself. I'm allergic to weed, but I don't think people should be in jail for it. These are not the same things at all. And then the general white right wing. No, there are perfectly reasonable economic right wing opinions. There is the business friendly right wing, which has nothing to do with any of these other cultural right wing elements of the right. And they're the ones sitting back going, what the hell happened to conservatism? What happened to slow change? These guys are certainly not advocates of marching with tiki torches. They're appalled by all of this. A lot of the family values types are appalled by that stuff. They may harbor certain racist thoughts, some of them, but because of biblical inspired natural law thinking, but they're not hostile racism. It's more, we don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with those types. We just think they should keep to their own kind. They're kind of funny. And I'm not saying that is true of all conservatives at all. I just said I have friends who are conservatives and they are appalled by what is going on, horrified. So already this article is exceptionally sloppy. And we've read four words within the body of it, alt-right and political right. We haven't even gotten in to the body of it. I'll skip over the idea of Palmer Luckey. You found one freaking guy who has hard right leaning sentiments in gay. I'm sure there are others, but does this article name them? Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's find out. But one guy does not indicate a general fueling of the rise of the far right by video games. That's an exception that proves the opposite rule. If you can only name one guy, well, I don't think there's a problem here. The idea that video games in general, not some video games, but video games in general, are fueling the rise of the far right is the medium is the message approach, which is a Marshall McLuhan concept that was actually the media is the massage, which isn't quite the same. But the thing you have to remember about things like that is McLuhan ducked peer review to go right to the public in general by just publishing the book. These are not accepted theories. They caught popular imagination, but they were sort of laughed out of the room during the peer review process. It became quite popular, the idea of hot and cold mediums. We hear this because Al Gore put it in his book about climate change, but there's actually no proof that your brain responds, less well to educational television than it does to reading a book. It's malarkey, as Joe Biden likes to say. Dumb shows are dumb. Smart shows are smart. Not everyone is a visual learner. Some people need to listen to learn. And documentaries for people like that, audiobooks, video games, they're very good that way because, like I said, especially with the emotional component, people who aren't necessarily good at identifying and naming emotions, they can still see it. When they see somebody look sad, they know what that means. They might not be able to find the exact words for it, but they know what that means. So we've already got some serious logic problems in this article, but let's dive in. Donald Trump's claim in the aftermath of the Florida school shooting is that the events are the result of violent video games, resurrects old arguments about whether young people emulate the games they play. Wrong. They're not arguing operant conditioning. They're arguing cultivated opinions that video games glorify violence and therefore cultivate general attitudes that violence is good and a way to solve problems, which isn't true either. But in the first sentence, they show that they don't quite understand what the current paradigm is. The operant conditioning argument was the one from the 1990s that was disproved. So the people who don't want to let it the hell go found a different excuse to keep whipping that dead horse. The World Health Organization's recent decision to consider video game addiction an official illness shows comparable concern. Yes, you read that right. They just claimed that worrying that certain gambling elements in video games are inherently addictive and designed to hook players are the same as worried that video games will turn your kids into serial killers. These are not comparable concerns. Not at all. They're not. They're apples and oranges. One has some science behind it. It's not saying that video games in general are inherently addictive. They're saying when you put certain components in them that we know trigger addiction-like compulsions in some people, that is gambling, then the people who have problems with compulsive gambling will partake in compulsive gambling in-game. And the problem with loot boxes is that's real money. Now, some people do use gaming in an unhealthy way. I believe it is avoidant behavior. As somebody who went through a phase when I was younger where I used video games to avoid life, and somebody looking at that on the outside would go, oh, the video games are the problem. No, it wasn't. The video games were the self-soothing behavior because my life sucked. But that means you're not dealing with it. When you're a kid, you don't necessarily have the agency to deal with it. So as much as I don't like the term video game addiction, I'm glad they're at least looking at it, because if the World Health Organization continues to look at it, sensational labels aside, there will be funding to look into this stuff, and I'm pretty sure they will eventually find no, compulsive video game playing is a reaction to problems, not the cause of it. Unlike, drug addiction, alcoholism, things like that. These are physical things. Now, they have found that the brain goes all crazy, and in some people it goes crazier than others in response to gambling. So there is something there, and that's the big difference between the concerns about compulsive gaming and the concerns about violent video games. One has current science, which could change. We're not as far along, but one has current science that gives us compelling reason for concern, not to close the book, but for concern. That's I'm going to say compulsive gaming, because I don't like the term addiction. I don't think it's accurate. But video games causing violence? Kids who play video games becoming violent in the real world? No evidence. Quite the opposite. Plenty of studies saying there is no link. These are not comparable concerns at all. So we are not even out of the first paragraph, and we already have problems, which means there was no editing on this piece at all. The Guardian is just letting people publish garbage. I know you guys are not big fans of the gaming websites, you know, Kotaku, Polygon, and so on. None of those would let this stuff through without some sort of citation, and that gets worse in this article. I'm telling you, as somebody who submitted to Polygon and went through the freelance editorial process, they will bust you for this. I agree with a lot of your other criticisms about sites like that, but they would not let something this sloppy through. It's this is really pathetic. And here we go. Here's the big thesis. However, these responses demonstrate anxiety about the right things for the wrong reasons. What are these right things? Concerns about video game, as they say, addiction. I say compulsive video game playing, or violent video games. Which is it? Gaming cultures are connected to violence, says the next word. What? Okay, clearly they're gonna back this up, right? As I just said, you need to cite this shit when you make a statement like that. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So what do they say next? But should be considered in terms of the rise of the far-right political discourse and the prominence of the alt-right misogyny and racism. So they absolutely do not back up the assertion that gaming cultures are connected to violence. Not the games themselves. Gaming culture, which is another leap entirely from the games themselves. The culture surrounding games is suddenly now connected to violence. Why does this author say this? We don't know. Magical fairy dust that makes gamers violent because there's been, violence at what? Let's move on. While Trump is firmly on the right, I disagree with that. He waffles back and forth. He has no real convictions. He was saying, we should raise the age that somebody can get rifles to 21 from 18 until the NRA got to him. He is not firmly on the right. I'm sorry, writer. He's just not. Prove it. I'm not seeing that. He was for abortion until he was against it. He was for gun control last week, and now he's against. He is not firmly on the right. He believes in tariffs, not a right-wing thing. He's a protectionist, which up until this year was a left-wing pro-union thing, not a right-wing right-to-work thing. Where is your evidence? This is just blah, blah. This is your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving territory right here. I know what I know, and I don't have to back it up to anybody. Let's move on. And the World Health Organization may embody normative centrism. Oh boy. There is an aspect of gaming that should worry the progressive left. Oh? Tell me more. What part of are you acknowledging the regressive left? Are you actually acknowledging that the regressive left exists? Because otherwise, why do you have to say progressive left? Isn't that the same thing? Are you acknowledging, perhaps, that left and right-wing economic policy are different from progressive and conservative social policy, and that perhaps someone could be fiscally left-wing but socially conservative, or fiscally right-wing and socially liberal? Or socially progressive, as you would say? What is the progressive left if all of the right is the same? All right. Games are ideological constructions which push a set of values on the user. I'm going to repeat that because that is just rich. Games are ideological constructions which push a set of values on the user. Yeah, because the sandbox games, Turok, really pushes a set of values on the user. Games where you can do pretty much anything you freaking want, we don't judge, push a set of values on the user. This is precisely the exact opposite of the entire concept of sandbox gaming, of player freedom. This is somebody who doesn't actually understand the fundamental principles of game design, the idea of maximum freedom, subtracting with the restrictions you want to put on a particular game to make it fun. If you are starting analyzing video games by saying that they're ideological constructions which push a set of values on the user, you are basically claiming that video games are propaganda. And they are not. I have studied propaganda. It absolutely does not work the same way. Is there some propagandizing in video games? Yes, it's what drove me crazy about Mass Effect Andromeda. It's what drives me crazy about elements of BioShock Infinite. It's what drives me crazy about whenever they try to inject a forced message into a game instead of just telling a story. It does start feeling like propaganda, but guess what? Media savvy players reject those attempts to propagandize. Ergo, games are not inherently ideological constructions which push a set of values on the user, because if they were, gamers wouldn't reject the attempts to push a set of values on them. Moving on. Like television and film, games have a key component that television and film do not have: interactivity. Interactivity, films and TV are not interactive. Video games are different. Film and television are completely different viewing experiences. But video games are more different still. You cannot compare the two. Like television and film, they often support the ideologies of their context. Blah, 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 blah. They often support the ideologies of their context. You mean the times in which they're made? That's kind of unavoidable. Why do I say that? Because in the Bush years, American games endorsed aggressive foreign policy. Oh, really? You're such an expert on video games that you could say they all did the same thing? Really? Really? All video games endorsed aggressive foreign policy. Really? I'm pretty sure that. And which Bush? Which Bush? Bush Sr. or Bush Jr.? You gotta kind of clarify, because I'm pretty sure American McGee's Alice didn't push aggressive foreign policy. I'm pretty sure that, a lot of the RPGs that were made in the West don't push aggressive foreign policy. Like, which Bush? Which Bush are you talking about? And are we talking about Kate Bush? Like, is it Bush Sr. or Bush Jr.? Are we talking W? I assume W, but there was more than one Bush president. Like, this is The Guardian. How do you make that kind of vague, mistake by lack of specificity? Since Brexit, British games advocate isolationism or nostalgia for empire, and the prominence of anti-Islam games in the 2000s tells it all. Excuse me? What? First of all, there haven't been that many games released since Brexit, because Brexit didn't happen long enough ago for a game to go through the development. So games that are coming out now started pre-Brexit. Okay? And wasn't Horizon Zero Dawn made in the UK? I could be wrong. They could be American. But there's plenty of UK games that do not advocate isolationism or nostalgia for empire. Like, these are just, they don't even give any examples. These are freaking sweeping generalizations. Like, what? Again, if you think that games just magically pop out within a year of a major world event, you don't understand how long it takes to make a game. Any game that is coming to market since Brexit was likely shown at trade shows before Brexit, and the major cities in which these games are developed, they voted Remain. it was outside the cities that voted leave. Now I know some people in gaming who were actually on the pro leave side, but the cities in which most of these games are made, they were on the remain side. So what is this isolationism and nostalgia for empire? The people making the games would have lived in places who oppose that. I mean, Britain itself was completely divided on the issue. This is just, there is no evidence, and I have no idea what they're even talking about anti-Islam games. I have absolutely no idea what they are referring to. They're probably Call of Duty. Because even Grand Theft Auto really doesn't have an opinion on Muslims. It's... And then you have games like the BioWare games that include, the Qunari are a mix between the Spartans and the Ottoman Turks. I mean, you could claim those are attempting to be more sympathetic to cultures such as that. The Assassin's Creed games, who do you think the assassins were? Who do you think Altair was? The assassins were Muslim. Altair was a brown guy. The first 3 Assassin's Creed games dealt with modern descendants of those Muslims. So how the heck can you claim that video games in the 2000s were across the board anti-Muslim? There's evidence to the contrary. Oh my God, we're barely through this. However, video games have at least 2 unique features compared to other media. Oh, thank you for pointing that out, since you've already argued like film and television. Okay. First, right-wing ideologies have been overrepresented and dominant throughout the history of video games. Excuse me? Bubba BioWare what? Okay. Although affected by context, oh, thank you for the caveat, video games have long focused on the expulsion of aliens, again, BioWare, Space Invaders to Space Invaders? You know what the thing about Space Invaders is? You know what the thing? The aliens always eventually win. There is no win condition to that game. You eventually lose. The aliens win. Like, in Saints Row, is it 3? Yeah, they have a dance-off with the aliens. This is how we do it. There's a big dance. No, that's 4, isn't it? But they're all dancing with the aliens and the robots at the end. Like, it's not the expulsion of aliens. It's the expulsion of an aggressor. Which is a sort of a left-wing attitude when you talk about things like occupation. XCOM. Fear of impure infection. All right, that's because of AIDS. Person, I almost swore there. I almost said something really bad. The fear of infection, the rise of things like zombie games and plagues were because of the AIDS epidemic. I know this because, again, I've talked about the fact that I was involved in AIDS awareness work. The fact that we got this increase in the zombies was because we had this thing that for years and there's still no cure. You can control the disease, but between that and climate change and superbugs and all this stuff, that's where the zombie fascination originally came from. Not some sort of purity norm. It has nothing to do with race. That is not a right-wing thing. That was, I don't want to get the clap part 6. Okay? It was just, I don't want to have my dick fall off because of sex. But I like sex. Oh my God, I'm terrified. So that's where that came from. They're just wrong. Border control, missile command, Plants vs. Zombies. Plants vs. Zombies is a right-wing plot. I am not kidding. And I assume they mean missile command, not missile commander, but I could be wrong. There's no hyperlink, so I don't know. Territory acquisition, Splatoon. Splatoon, people, it's not capture the flag. It's not non-violent. That's essentially paintball. This isn't a paintball game. No, it's territory acquisition. You know, heaven forbid they create a game where it's not about killing people. It's about how much paint can you splatter around. You know, they were trying to think outside the box when it came to something that's an alternative to violence, and every good for them. You thought, you got creative. No, now it's acquisition of territory. Occupier! Splatoon is all of a sudden fucking Israel in the minds of this left wing. You know, when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. Like, that doesn't mean I'm anti-Israel, guys. It's just, you know what I mean. Like, this is ridiculous. Ridiculous. It is paintball. Empire building, civilization of Tropico. I would think they'd love Tropico. Like, I would absolutely think they'd love Tropico. But here's why they're wrong there. Oh my God, this video is going to be long, but this is how much is wrong. Okay, Civilization, they've clearly never played Civilization because there's more than one way to win in Civilization. In, what was it, Civ 5 was the one that if you wanted a culture victory, you basically had to have only 3 cities. You had to make really small territories and just pump your culture output because the bigger you got, the harder it was to build culture. It's hardly expansionist. I mean, the thing that was so cool about that game, about those games, I love the Civilization games because it's not just military expansion. You're not always being Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar. You know, you can have a science victory. You can, like I said, culture. You can go and actually, that was a big complaint about Civilization 5, wasn't it? You couldn't build those great, big, sprawling empires. So they're just wrong again there. And then Tropico, the whole point of Tropico is you play as a banana republic. I think the Tropico games are brilliant in their farce because you actually show that, you know, being a dictator is kind of fun. And first of all, the music is great, and you get the citizens of Tropico. Our 5-year plan will be completed in 4 years. We will celebrate after the victory. You know, you realize how pedantic propaganda is, but you know, you're like, oh, this is awful. But after a while, when that announcement comes on, you're like, citizens of Tropico. It starts to become comforting, and that's what happens in those dictatorships. And you realize, like, man, power's fun. Unlike other games, you have to worry about keeping people happy. Okay, they might revolt, but you can step on their necks if you want. You're a dictator. And the fact that it is so blasé, that it is so awful, you know, you can suspend human rights in many weird and wonderful ways, makes you understand the chilling lure of power. And I think I know me playing it, I wasn't sure about the games because I don't like all that, you know, Banana Republic type stuff. But I was surprised at how much I actually liked the games. People recommended them over and over and over again. And I thought the publisher was actually pretty cool. So I gave it a try. And I realized, no, I don't have to like those Banana Republics. They are not glorifying them. They are showing how horrible they are. And now I really enjoy the games. I think they actually have a very socially progressive message because they're not trying to spoon feed you. They're just telling a very goofy story. It's like the Overlord games, I think, actually make you more empathetic in their own way. And they use humor to do it. So they don't know what they're talking about. They've watched these games. They haven't played these games. Princess Recovery. This is a real world thing. Princess Recovery is up there with Expulsion of Aliens, Fear of Impure Infection, Border Control, Territory Acquisition, Empire Building. Princess Recovery. Are we especially concerned about Meghan Markle now? What is Princess Recovery? I don't know this social principle. What is Princess Recovery? I would like to know. Does this have something to do with Disney stock? What is it? You know? And 2 games. Mario to Zelda. Oh, all gaming is a princess. And Restoration of Natural Harmony. I'm sorry, isn't that a left-wing thing? Isn't environmental protection? And I just love how they cite Farmville, right? Farmville. Not something like Horizon Zero Dawn that's actually about terraforming, but Farmville, where you can get pink cows in bunny suits and put them on your farm. This is not exactly a deeply educated viewpoint. Just saying. Okay. I'm starting to get heartburn from this. Like, oh my god, I'm getting burpy here. Like, just, ugh. I need to drink like Pepto while I'm dealing with this stuff. Like, man, this is awful. Second, oh my god, that was just the first point. Second, video games put the user to work on an instinctual level. Wrong. Games are highly cognitive. They're highly systemized thinking. Puzzle solving is not instinctual. I'm sorry. No, they're not. That's not how they work. Bet. Making controls intuitive does not mean that games work on the instinctual level. No, they don't. The reason the controls have to be intuitive is because you're thinking about too many things. If you're thinking about the controller as well, boom, you're dead. Because, no, if games really worked on an instinctual level, more normies would play games. They're highly cognitive functions. That's just wrong. Making the gamer feel impulsive agreement with these ideologies. See Lady Bits episode 5, where I talk about the fact that I had an issue with BioShock Infinite's first-person perspective because I vehemently disagreed with Booker DeWitt's position and he was talking in my ear. They're wrong. Because games encourage choice, when that choice is taken away from the player, they question it more strongly. They do not, because when, if you're playing Dragon Age or if you're playing Mass Effect and you're trying to decide, okay, do I sacrifice Krem's team or, to seal my alliance with the Qunari, or do I blow the alliance to save my friends? That is not an impulsive agreement with the ideology of the game. That just isn't. Like, this. See how I'm giving examples to show this? They're not doing that in this article. Oh, we have an example. Playing Resident Evil is not equivalent to watching the movie. This is probably the first thing I agree with because the movie sucked balls. Excuse me for the people who like the movie. They were shot in Toronto, but I tried to watch one. It's like, I'm gonna barf Chris's blood, man. Like, this is not Resident Evil. The tension of, yes, playing a video game is not the same as the movie. The movie is not necessarily for the people who play the games. The people who play the games like the game. Some of them may go to see the movie because they like the subject material, but most people, it's not Jill, it's what's her name? Alice? I think that's her name. I only saw like the first two and I'm like, holy shit, this is awful. I have a friend who watches them and she likes them. And she got more into gaming. She's like, I'm going to try this, but I think that's what the movies are designed to do. They're designed to expose people to the IPs, but people who like games play games. People who like movies watch movies. Some people like both, but I am definitely much more of a gamer than a movie person. But the whole idea is we'll expose more people to the IP, so maybe they'll try the game. It's not, But here's what they say about why it's not the same. Because the controller-wielding gamer experiences the desires of the game as their own desires, not as the desires of another. Again, if you watch Lady Bits episode 5, I'm sorry, this whole article is just a commercial for Lady Bits episode 5, you will know that is not true. The section that deals with Resident fucking Evil deals with the fact that developers found that younger players couldn't relate to third-person horror. Why should I be scared for another person? That is not experiencing desires of the game as their own desires. That is experiencing the desires of the game as the desires of another. They need a first-person perspective to the game to tell them this is your desire, this is your drives, this is your instincts, not Chris or Jill or whatever. The actual field research in the industry proves this philosophical claptrap is more accurate. I'll go with claptrap, but it proves it wrong. This is not what we're finding in gaming at all. The problem with third-person horror games for younger players is they are experiencing the desires of the game as the desires of another. You can't be more cut and dried than that. And here we go into the thing where I'm like, oh, you're kidding. I've already talked about this, but the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan distinguished between drives and instincts. And this is when, guys, should I even bother going through this? First of all, they actually mischaracterize Lacan. Lacan had this concept of a libidinous economy that was Freud, not Marx. So when you start talking about political forces, that's more of a Marxist take. Lacan was much more Freudian. This is a person's interpretation of Lacan, and Lacan is prone to interpretation because on the best of days, nobody can understand what the fuck Lacan was really saying. But the idea that it was as complex a paradigm as they are trying to claim here is not how I understand Lacan. Now, I throw Lacan out the window because it's all that phallocentric dick, 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 more dick, women want dick, but don't have a dick, 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 dick. I throw that all out because it's just fruit of the poisonous tree. Lacan contributed some interesting structural and procedural things to psychology, and so he, deserves a place in history. But if you're basing your entire argument on Lacan, you are in very, very, very shaky ground, because Lacan is like, a guy standing on Freud's head, and Freud is really shaky, and he's even more shaky, and anybody who's played any sort of, physics-based game knows what happens when it all falls apart. Like, Lacan jumped through all these hoops to try to show that Freud's mistakes, the holes in Freud's logic, weren't really holes at all, but Freud's wrong and Lacan's right, because Lacan was the guy who figured it out, so psych, I'm better than Freud. It's like a lot of Lacan is just trying to teabag Freud because he really wants to be Freud. Like, just psychology is full of a lot of team kills. I'll move on because you'll see the psychobabble that comes next out of this, right? Like, naturalizing, in these terms, video games are drives masquerading as instincts. We've already been through why that's wrong. Naturalizing right-wing ideologies in a way other media cannot, by offering its users the chance to experience them on a personal level. Now, okay, I'll give them that in certain games, like, say, Dragon Age 2, there are certain right-wing ideologies that you can choose to align with. But you also have the option to align with the left-wing ideologies. You notice they're not actually saying what the right-wing ideologies are? It's just this amorphous right-wing thing. In this way, the rationale of gaming is to unite pleasurable impulse with political ideology, a process which renders gamers susceptible to discourses that urge people to follow their instincts while also prescribing what those instincts ought to be. That's, they've clearly never heard about the player freedom element of game design, but we've talked that to death. Trump's discourse on his proposed U.S.-Mexico wall and appeals to ethno-nationalism are cases in point. Supporters are not merely expected to agree logically, but to impulsively feel the political desire, the very logic of gaming. Donald Trump is not a video game. That's just a bad sentence, first of all, but also, if you look at a game like Papers, Please, you get the opposite. That is a really interesting game. That actually does push you into instinct mode deliberately because you have to work fast. But while you're in instinct mode in the moment, like, what's so brilliant about that game is it basically goes, because if you screw up, somebody gets through with a bomb. Because there's a real threat, but that threat is a minority, you start rejecting people. You start becoming more and more of a border asshole. You let fewer and fewer people through because you have to process as many people as you can to keep getting money to feed your family. And it's how many people you process, not how accurate you are. But, you know, if something goes through and the checkpoint gets blown up, well, that's pretty bad. It actually teaches you how systems can make people lose empathy for people like Mexican immigrants, Muslim refugees. It actually helps people understand both sides of the problem. That's hardly an impulsive desire. That's actually making us think. Because the cool thing about games is you might not be thinking about it right away in that moment. But when you go take a break and you're thinking about it because you did experience it, it really retains in this cool way. And you're like, you think about it as this, how did I feel about doing that? And how does that inform my perspective on the issue instead of, well, that was an okay movie. That's a part about games I really, really like. And obviously I have a completely different perspective from this author, but it goes beyond that. I actually think this author is wrong. And that's why I'm taking the time to go through this. Where am I here? Okay. Angela Nagle's book, Kill All Normies, showed how disparate right-wing and apolitical troll communities coalesced into the alt-right. That's not confirmed. The alt-right may have weaponized troll communities, but troll communities were not the alt-right. But the link between gaming and the right wing runs deeper and goes back further. Games attracted right-wing players because they carried right-wing messages and produced right-wing pleasures. And even more worryingly, they prepared apolitical gamers for the later embrace of right-wing values. Is this where I should point out that during the 1990s, it was the right that couldn't stand video games? You know what happened? The right wing realized they could catch more flies with honey than they could with vinegar, and they wanted those young male votes. And so instead of attacking games, they started trying to figure out how they could co-opt games, same as the US Army did, the same as certain left-wing pundits are too fucking dumb to do. It's a powerful voting bloc. And more they're actually finding that gamers are a voting bloc, and that it's a voting bloc that should be catered to, because the average gamer year to year ranges between 30 and 38. Those people vote. Where am I? When game makers like Oculus VR creator Palmer Luckey support right-wing and right libertarian causes, we're not seeing a new trend of gamers turning to the right, but a clue to the structure of gaming and its historical role in incubating such ideologies. Nope. There are gamers who are right-wing. There are gamers who are left-wing. There's no political strike to gaming. And here's the thing. Gamers like it that way. We want it to be that we don't care what you are outside of games. You want to play? Leave your politics at the door. You know, one of the things that put me off World of Warcraft is people were talking about fucking politics in, was it Azeroth or something like that? I forget the name of I confuse it with the Soul Calibur guy. But I'm like trying to be a Tauren shaman, and people were debating Obama McCain, and I'm like, fuck this. I come here to get away from this. I ran away from that damn pub so fast. It really put me off WoW. It did. I ended up only playing WoW with people I knew and avoided the pubs and they're like, you can turn that off. I don't want to, because then you have to remember to turn it back on. But like, oh my God, leave it alone. You want to talk politics? Go to a message board. Don't be a pubby twit. Anyway, we're almost through this, guys. In the 1990s, another theoretical response to gaming emerged, which has recently been reasserted. New commentators argue that games provide a channel for frustrations that might otherwise be unleashed onto society, making games a protection from violence rather than a cause of it. The two positions make different mistakes. Oh, you mean like this entire article? This is actually starting to make sense. But, oh no, it's a mistake, and they're devoting 2 whole paragraphs to that. All right, let's see what they say. Trump's recourse to the old argument about gaming overstates the role of games, like you just did the entire fucking article, and places culture over legal and economic conditions. You're just negating your position from this point. Whatever. Okay, I'll give them benefit of the doubt here. See, I am reasonable. Okay. He goes after the gamers to deflect attention from the gun laws underlying mass shootings. Okay. On the other hand, the idea that games prevent violence downplays their role, implying that violent and misogynistic desires exist in all of us, and games do no more than provide an outlet for such impulses. That's actually what the science on the issue says, and that's actually kind of what Lacan said as well, that the libidinous economy was idiosyncratic in each person and linked to and all this stuff. Like, this is a whack-a-mole argument, but let's finish. This position ignores the fact that games can have concrete ideological effects on us and make us desire politically charged things on a personal level, which is really funny because if you talk to most hardcore gamers, the most charged thing they will say is we want politics kept out of our games. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there were no video games in the 1960s. Where are we going with this? Hollywood cinema transformed the desires, empathies, and emotions of a global population, even for those who never went to the movies. What? But it's harder to recognize the pattern in your own context, and we may need to consider whether we are in the midst of a comparable revolution with video games today. Currently, the new desires incubated by games lean far to the right, and without more progressive games on the market, though some are emerging, the future may be even bleaker than the political present. Oh, you end up with a prophecy of doom. Oh my God, I'm sweating. Like, what was that? What was that? Jumped all over the place. Hollywood cinema transformed the desires, empathies, and emotions of a global population. How the hell is that possible? It was Hollywood. How did that change the desires of people in Africa? You know what people in Africa wanted in the 80s? Food. It was a drought. There was a famine. I don't know how Hollywood had anything to do with that desire. Like, they failed to back up anything. They're asserting there's a whack-a-mole of game titles in the center of this, but this is completely lacking any evidence by way of examples, any citation except Lacan, which is highly questionable at best, bullshit at worst, and just this is a classic example of someone having an opinion, having a political opinion, and because they play a game that may cause them to question their opinion, they see this as propaganda for the other side, instead of a medium that actually encourages critical thinking, that may actually provide the space for someone to question their own assumptions, as opposed to telling them what to think. To somebody who is far on a political extreme, those two things look the same. And I think what games actually do is they sort of reject political extremes in all forms. That to me, when I play games, seems to be the big overriding message, that extremes of any sort lead to global conflict, lives are lost, and the little guy, the soldier, even the hero, has to solve the problems created by mismanagement by the ruling class, politicians, things like that. That seems to be the general message of games. And to me, what I tie that to is the rise of superheroes after the Depression. And, video games are in many ways an interactive superhero genre. And if you go all the way back to Superman, which was the first superhero, that was a creation of the New Deal. The idea that somebody is there fighting for the little guy, not for governments, but for regular people, was the idea of social programs and help for the middle class made tangible. And so if you trace that back to that origin, that sort of hero fiction in the modern age actually has a left-wing root. And the whole, see, the funny thing is both the right and the left think they have the market cornered on freedoms. They just have a different way of going about those freedoms. It's funny because I just noticed the BioShock figures behind me. And, the original BioShock skewered objectivism. The second BioShock skewered collectivism. The third BioShock basically skewered theocracy and, charismatic cults. It was messier. And that was a bit of an issue with the game. The game was something of a hot mess, but I think that's where they were going with it. But the fact that, BioShock 1 kind of hits the right, BioShock 2 kind of hits the left, BioShock 3 attacks theocracies, it's really, what's the through line? Extremism. And I think that if we actually had more gamer gaze, I've talked about this before, which is Lacan. I'm turning Lacan a bit on his ear. Because what I'm doing with Lacan is taking the idea of there is a perception, and perception does impact what we perceive to be reality. But unlike Lacan, who oversimplified it to libidinal economy, the dick, I'm saying no, it has nothing to do with body parts. It has everything to do with, call it experience, call it innate nature, call it a combination of both. The media we consume does help us structure our thinking, not the core pillars behind our thinking. Those take a lot more to change. But the way we come about conclusions, the media we consume does help structure that. And that's why the idea of a performative gamer gaze is very real, because this article is a classic example of someone who doesn't have that performative gamer gaze, and therefore they don't understand how gamers actually interact with games. They may have tried games every so often, but they're still viewing it through the lens of something you watch, of something you sit there and passively take in. That's the only way you believe that people can actually propagandize through games. The reason propaganda works is it's a passive audience. You're trying to wear down. And certain games do experiment with that sort of wearing down of identity. I talked about Far Cry in Lady Bits episode 5, but that's deliberate. And then at the end, if you do succumb to that wearing down of identity, you get a less satisfying ending. I mean, that's hardly authoritarianism. I have a hard time claiming that Watch Dogs, especially Watch Dogs 2, is right wing. It's hacker culture. It's a multicultural cast, and I'm not saying multiculturalism is not right wing. A lot of the brown people coming into North America right now, they have conservative leanings because they come from traditionalist parts of countries, and that just seems to, they prefer slow change. But they're not going to be anti-immigrant. Right and left are not the simple distinctions that this article seems to make them out to be. And the only way any of these arguments hold is not through logic, but through some sort of gut level emotional based assumptions about what the left and the right are. And this author seems to define the right as a lack of compassion instead of a different structure for that compassion, a disagreement about the form that compassion should take. And that's not the same thing. I think this writer needs to get out and actually talk to some people on the right and not just fight with them on social media as part of a performance of the political binary. And The Guardian needs to stop publishing this irresponsible crap. So if you've hung in, bless you. Go out and think for yourself.